Well, South Africa's revenue, the money coming in for this year, is better than expected due to a windfall for mining companies. That has led to better taxes. But at the same time, South Africa's debt problem is not going away. The finance minister has confirmed that we now owe 4 trillion rand to creditors. And the money not only has to be paid back, but interest on that money needs to be paid. From next year, servicing debt costs will be the biggest expenditure item on the budget. To discuss, we're now joined by Director at Acacia Economics, Sha'ista Gogo. We're also joined by Chief Economist at IQ Business, Sifiso Skenjana. Let me start with you, Ms. Gogo. Did he hit the right tones today? It's been called a pragmatic budget, midterm budget. He had to deal with debt, Eskom, a whole lot of issues. Just give us your overall impression.
Well, I think the finance minister had a tough task this year. I mean, it's coming out of COVID, coming out of a very stressful period after the unrest in June. And I think what he did was strike a fairly pragmatic budget. I think his focus was very much on some of the real issues that affect growth in this country. He did, however, defer some major areas that people had thought he was going to talk about. For example, the social grants, things like the e-tolls for SANRAL. So there are a few big policy questions that got deferred to the next budget. But overall, I think he struck the right notes. He's had a very conservative budget, and he sort of prevented himself from using the temptation of using the money that we got during the commodities increase recently for other spending, instead holding that to draw down the debt. So I think, yes, it was a pragmatic budget that struck the right notes.
But debt's still ticking upwards if we look at the projections. Your overall impression, Mr. Skenjana? You're on mute.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the big pressure points. And I mean, if you just look now what our debt servicing costs and as a percentage of overall revenue collected, it's now ticked up from about 21 cents for every rand collected to about 24.4 cents. And if you take into account then the windfall, you take away the windfall, which is in essence not expected to be a continuing revenue item, that would have gone to about 26 cents of every revenue we collect goes to debt servicing. And that was already, I think, shown in what we often talk to as our yield curve, which is usually just an indicative measure of what our cost of borrowing is going to look like as investors price it in. And so I think that's one of the things, I mean, we heard from the minister that it's now bigger than police, it's bigger than health. And simply it's saying that it's cannibalizing real developmental investment and spending. And I think that's one of the issues that we're really going to need to focus on going into the big budget going into February.
Mr. Skenjana, thank you for putting it that way. I think it makes it really clear. For every 1 rand of revenue coming in from taxes or wherever, 26 cents goes towards just servicing our debt, just paying the interest on that. And the rating agencies, investors want South Africa to stabilize its debt. Others are saying we can't be so addicted to austerity. We need to spend to get ourselves out of this hole. So how's he dealing with that balance?
I think it sounds like he's taking a slightly different approach from former Minister Domboweni. I mean, literature tells us that when you've got a declining economic context, it's not a prudent thing to do to go into fiscal austerity. It often results in lesser economic outcomes in the medium term. And so already I think he's suggesting that we're going to go into a little bit of an expansionary view and we're not going to accelerate consolidation. I think he also conceded that they're struggling to rein in the public sector wage constraint, and with inflation now also looking like it's going to remain elevated for the next quarter, I think that's going to be a material pressure point. So I think on the one side, ratings agencies want to see sustainable growth from an economic point of view. They want to see social stability. One of the things that's spoken about in South Africa is that poverty and inequality are going to be sources of civil instability, and those are going to be also kind of heightened measures of risk. But I think we have to sometimes figure out sustainable ways of spending into growth. Infrastructure is one of the ways that usually happens where you can do that sustainably. But as the minister said, that we've got a funding gap of about 440 billion that needs private sector to come in to help those 50 infrastructure projects come into market.
Yeah, and infrastructure was the big savior during COVID-19. That was often spoken about by the president. Ms. Gogo, was this a big concession? The finance minister said all of our efforts over the past 13 years have been to fix Eskom instead of adding additional capacity to the grid. And of course, now there's a scurry to add extra watts, to get renewable energy online, to get companies to produce their own energy. But was this saying that it could have been done years and years and years ago?
I think it was. I think it was a massive concession to sort of say that they should have done it earlier. I think the other thing that was very important in this budget speech was the fact that no more money was given to state-owned enterprises for bailouts. I mean, there was a small amount given to Denel, but overall, what we've seen in previous years is money being pumped into Eskom itself. And I think the movement away to say, let's bring on other renewable energies, the focus on the renewable energy program and the new capacity coming on was a major shift in how the Treasury has looked at this. And I think also it's notably a bit of a shift from some of the discussions we've had coming from the Department of Minerals and Energy recently. So I think it's going to be quite important for Treasury and the DME to sort of sing off the same sheet going forward.
Well, what does that mean, finally? No more money for SOEs. What does that mean for Eskom? Because it has unsustainable debt, many believe, and of course government has already issued guarantees. So if Eskom defaults, government has to pay anyway.
Well, I think the important thing here is to look at Eskom in the broader sense. I think this is hopefully going to facilitate the unbundling of Eskom into its different entities, transmission, generation, the introduction in competition in the sections of electricity that are more conducive to it. So hopefully that will sort of push for more reforms to be done. But in terms of the overall budget of Eskom, I think, it's possible that some bailouts will be required, although if maybe there's sales of particular assets, that might be able to be reduced slightly.
All right, we have to end it there. Thank you both so much. Director at Acacia Economics, Sha'ista Gogo, and also Chief Economist at IQ Business, Sifiso Skenjana. Let's stay with